Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Doomslayer won My Hero Academia? This amazing story was written by reeleffendeel. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Chapter 16. End of the Sabers. Island's central tower bottom floor lobby. The Doomslayer glared at his enemies while maintaining an intimidating stance. While he was admittedly caught off guard earlier, he now had a good grasp on what their quirks were and was ready for anything. The loss of his chainsaw was no surprise to him. After hacking through hordes of demons, it was only going to be a matter of time before the chain suffered from wear and damage during his battles against Hell. The same thing happened to his other chainsaw back in his home universe. It wasn't a big deal since he could just as easily find a replacement for it somewhere down the line. I must admit, I never thought it was possible for one man to completely destroy my organization. 9 started unbuttoning his suit. The Slayer took note of the tiny dents in the frontal breastplate of 9's armor. That had to be reinforced plating, something that his regular sawed-off couldn't penetrate. Now, if only he had his old super shotgun with him, Lucifer's Bane, then it would have been a completely different story. However, you will not find us to be easy prey. This is where your rampage ends. The Slayer raised an eyebrow. Were the bodies not a clear indicator of how this was going to go down? You got a lot of guts for talking us all on by yourself. Too bad we have to rip him out of you. Chimera bared his teeth in ravenous excitement as he flexed his claws. Mummy and Slice said nothing, but they were out for the Slayer's blood. Mummy's bandages stretched and wrapped around whatever debris they could reach and created a small army of mummies behind him. The hair on Slice's head formed into 8 tentacles, each end turned into blades sharp enough to cut through steel along with several smaller curved blades along the sides. She slipped on a pair of gloves that extended into thin metallic claws from her fingertips with an insidious glint in her eyes. For the Slayer, no more words needed to be spoken. Andrew Hulshultgeroth. He drew his combat shotgun and swiftly fired at them with the charged burst. 9, Slice, and Chimera dove out of the way while mummies charged forward, some of them taking the shots to shield their master. The Slayer charged forward while tanking lightning blasts and throwing knives from 9 and Slice. He tore his way through the horde of mummies, blasting them away with his shotgun while he grabbed one of them with his free hand and used it as a bludgeon. If he had to compare, these things would be equal to the possessed and the unwilling, but far weaker. He chucked a grenade towards the nearest cluster, and the explosion ripped them to ribbons, revealing Mummy in the back of the crowd who was controlling them. He aimed his shotgun at the villain only for Chimera to jump in front of him and block the shots with his body. The pellets did not penetrate through him, though they did tear up his thick skin pretty badly. Chimera let out a roar and launched himself at the Slayer just as the Berserker stashed his combat shotgun away and charged in as well. They grappled with each other, the wolf beast grabbing the Slayer by his hands and attempting to force him down on his knees. But the Slayer proved to be stronger as he began to easily push back Chimera, much to the latter's shock. The Slayer could tell there was some strength behind Chimera's grip, though the villain only came to about several rungs below a Hell Knight. He twisted Chimera's arm, and then followed up by throwing Chimera over his head into the ground. He whipped out his super shotgun and blew away several mummies from the left before lifting his foot to slam it down on Chimera's face, but the villain rolled out of the way and threw a punch at the Slayer's head. But the Slayer head-butt the blow, breaking Chimera's knuckles as he returned the favor with a punch right in the gut hard enough to rupture several organs. Chimera fell to his knees and puked up blood as the Slayer kicked him across the face, sending his fangs flying out of his mouth. He grabbed him by the tail and swung Chimera around hard enough to tear his tail off, and sent him smashing into a column at the other end of the room. As it collapsed on top of Chimera, the Doomslayer whirled around and punched away a mass of bladed hair tentacles coming straight at him. Slice dove in from the right and slashed her claws across his side, but to her surprise, the blades shattered against his armor. She barely dodged an overhead blow from the Slayer and blasted him with a burst of quills from her hair. The quills harmlessly plinked off of his armor as he grabbed Slice by her locks, but Mummy ran in and severed her hair before the Slayer could tear it off. He sent several mummies to swarm the Doomslayer, but he easily swatted them aside and grabbed the largest one within his sights by its eye. He chucked it straight at Mummy, which collided with him, then sent him crashing right into Slice, and the two slammed into the wall hard enough to leave cracks. 9 bolted from the right and fired a beam of electricity at the doomslayer, who charged straight towards it without a hint of hesitation. The beam struck him square in the chest, but his Predator suit was so heavily insulated that the Slayer felt nothing, and he ran through the beam. While he was staggered by Nine's attacks beforehand, that was only because he had the element of surprise, and now the Slayer could tank anything Nine threw at him. Nine panicked and summoned a ball of compressed wind with his other hand and chucked it directly at the Slayer. The orb connected with his helmet, and a burst of air exploded within a large radius, scattering rubble and debris around the room and knocking over a few pillars. Any normal man would have been torn apart by the sheer force of the explosive air, but it didn't do much as it failed to interrupt the Slayer's advance. He pulled out his HAR and fired a burst of potshots at Nine. The Merc leader quickly created a wall of thick ice to block the bullets, but they started to rapidly chip away at the wall until Nine channeled a miniature tornado with both of his hands and blasted it through the ice wall towards the Slayer. As the whipping winds and bolts of lightning slammed against his Predator suit, he launched his micro-missiles from his HAR, but the whipping winds threw the missiles off balance, scattering them around the lobby and detonating against anything they hit. As the Slayer drew closer, Nine threw a wave of frozen daggers at the HAR, encasing it in ice and forcing the Slayer to put it away. The mercenary leader darted at him with his wrist blades, which were now covered in electricity, while the Slayer charged in with his fists at the ready. Nine dodged the fist swing and darted around the Slayer like a wasp as he slashed away at his armor with his blades, but soon realized it had no effect at all. The Slayer slugged Nine from the side, crushing a huge chunk of his armor and busting some of his ribs. Nine swung at the Slayer's visor, but he easily dodged the blow, grabbed Nine by the arm, and swung him down to the floor. The Doomslayer repeatedly pulverized him down into the ground with enough force to dislocate his arm at the shoulder. It was like he was beating a pillow. A living, breathing pillow filled with blood and meat that deserved to die. Chimera, Slice, and Mummy quickly ran over to aid their leader, but the Slayer whipped out his chain gun with the Gatling rotator mod with his free hand and unleashed a spray of incendiary cartridges at them to keep his cronies at bay. Chimera ripped out a huge chunk of the floor and used it as a tower shield to defend himself and his allies, but the rounds tore through the makeshift shield and nailed Chimera in the chest multiple times. While Slice and Mummy ran behind the columns for cover, the Slayer swept the chain gun from side to side, while Chimera writhed on the ground, his chest bleeding profusely while his fur burned. Taking advantage of the Doomslayer's distraction, Nine clenched his other functioning hand and fired a lightning bolt at the Slayer's left shoulder, which caused him to release Nine when the blast knocked his chain gun out of his hand. Nine backflipped away from the Slayer and popped his arm back into its socket, giving the Doomslayer a furious look. He started throwing ice spears at the Slayer, who easily punched each one into shards, but this was only a distraction as Nine ran towards him with his wrist blades covered in electricity. But before the blades could even connect, the Slayer grabbed him by the wrists. Nine responded by blasting lighting from his hands at the Slayer again. This time it was point blank towards the Slayer's face, but much to his horror, it didn't even faze him. The Slayer tightened his grip around Nine's wrists and lifted his foot, ready to kick him away and rip both of his arms off in the process. The Doomslayer snapped his head upwards to witness Chainsaw leaping down from a balcony above and plummeting straight towards him. Chainsaw threw out its lanky arms at the Slayer, which wrapped around his arms and neck, forcing the Slayer to release Nine as he was dragged away. But that didn't stop him from slamming his foot onto Nine's chest, shattering a good chunk of the mercenary leader's armor along with his ribs. Nine hacked up a wad of blood inside his faceplate as he was smacked into a column. As Slice and Mummy ran over to help Nine up, the Slayer grappled with Chainsaw, whose tentacles constricted his arms, while its chainsaw arms slashed the Slayer across his armor. However, because regular Nomu did not have access to higher brain functions than their high-end counterparts, it was too dumb to realize that its attacks were doing precisely jack shit against the Doomslayer's Predator suit. The Hellwalker ripped apart the tentacles with his bare hands and slugged Chainsaw across the face, heavily denting its helmet. Chainsaw surged forward with his drill arm thrust right at the Slayer's face, only for him to grab the appendage and forcefully tear it off. He redirected the still-spinning drill right into Chainsaw's abdomen, But the monster's skin was abnormally thick and rubbery, which caused the drill to only embed itself halfway in. But the Slayer applied more force and shoved the whole drill deeper into its stomach, drilling through its intestines in the process, while blackened blood spilled on the floor. But that didn't kill it. Chainsaw brought its saws down upon the Slayer to zero effect, prompting him to grab the Nomu by the neck and punch him in the face repeatedly like a jackhammer. Each blow shattered its helmet bit by bit and dislodged the metal gag that was inside Chainsaw's mouth. The next strike destroyed the upper half of the helmet, revealing a cluster of eyeballs messily grouped together along with an exposed, pulsating brain. The same kind of creature seen in the USJ villain invasion footage. The Slayer reared his fist back. YAARF. Chainsaw vomited a stream of corrosive acid straight at the Slayer, covering his helmet in caustic ooze. He instinctively threw a punch, but instead of hitting the brain, the blow connected with its lower jaw and knocked it right off of its face. Chainsaw responded by shooting an array of purple beams from its multitude of eyes, encasing the upper right portion of the Slayer's body in stone. The Slayer punched the Nomu away from him and used his remaining free arm to break away the stone encasing his body. He wiped away the steaming green gunk off of his visor and glared at Chainsaw, who sat itself up, gurgling a threatening undulation as blood and acid dripped from its jawless maw. The Slayer grimaced in disgust. I am detecting no life signals emanating from the creature. My scans show that its internal organs are in a state of necrosis, but the unidentified chemicals running through its veins are preventing it from decaying any further. I can confirm through additional scans that the creature has up to 5 different quirks. Though a person acquiring 2 quirks is usually quite rare, it is biologically impossible to possess 3 or more quirks. This has led me to the conclusion that you are facing a reanimated cadaver that has been heavily altered at a genetic level. The Doomslayer narrowed his eyes at Chainsaw. His earlier suspicion about the Nomu being super soldiers was spot on, and it felt way too much like the alternate UAC's Revenant program. That settled it. The League of Villains is now a credible threat that must be eliminated. Mummy and Slice stared at the monster in mortification as Nine caught his breath. That fucking LOV prick probably sent that thing to kill him. Does he think we're incompetent? Slice hissed as Mummy wrinkled his nose. It doesn't matter. Nine seethed as he tore off his face mask, blood dribbling down his chin. I don't care if that thing gets in our way. I want him dead. Nine tapped a few buttons on his armored wristband, and 2 cylindrical superconductors popped out of his back while ripping through his suit. Attached to his armor, the conductors began to directly amplify Nine's quirk, which caused lightning and gusts of wind to surge around him, tearing off his clothes and revealing his armored bodysuit. The ground beneath his feet started to freeze while glowing purple veins spread their way all across Nine's body. His pupils glowed bright red as he glared at the Slayer with hatred. Behind his visor, the Doomslayer stared back at Nine not with contempt, but rather indifference. Did he really think that little power-up was going to help him? However, his subordinates were starting to take this seriously as well. Mummy unsheathed his sword and pressed a button that made the blade vibrate at subsonic frequencies, while his bandages gathered rubble from around the atrium to form a house-sized mummy with a gorilla-like stature. Slice's hair billowed out and transformed into 2 massive hands with spiked knuckles. Also swapping out her gloves for a pair of stair TMPs, Chimera underwent a transformation that tore away his uniform and now gave him a bestial appearance. He had grown several feet tall, with rippling muscles bulging out of his fur, and stood atop a pair of hind legs while his claws looked capable of cleaving through solid rock. Multiple quills grew along the length of his arms, while he also sported a pair of eagle-like wings and a scaly tail resembling that of an alligator. 2 curved bull horns protruded out of Chimera's head, giving him a monstrous appearance not unlike a baron of hell covered in fur. His wounds had also healed as a result of the transformation. Standing before the Slayer with the still slobbering Nomu nearby, Nine and his lieutenants were ready for the second round. The Doomslayer's response was to pull out his super shotgun and load in 2 new shells. He was done messing around. Chimera breathed in a lungful of air and expelled an incendiary beam from his mouth at the Slayer. The Slayer made a quick dash to the left while avoiding the Medusa rays that Chainsaw was firing at him. He fired the super shotgun at Nine, but he evaded the blast and countered by throwing a javelin made of ice. The Slayer easily shot it out of the air, but Nine struck him with another lighting blast that sent the Slayer skidding back a few inches. The Slayer noted the lighting strike had more force than the last one. Guess those pylons on his back weren't just for show. Mummy sent his bandaged giant after the Slayer while Chainsaw charged in, rapidly closing the distance while spewing acid and Medusa rays at him. The Doomslayer avoided the acid and rays while he caught the giant's hand when it swung an oversized fist at him. He threw the Mummy giant at Chainsaw, who spewed a stream of acid at the golem. The enzymes easily spread across the Mummy and melted it into a steaming puddle, but that's when the Slayer ran towards Chainsaw while it was distracted. All the while he blew away another ice spear that Nine hurled at him with his super shotgun. Reloading, he blasted Chainsaw in the chest, knocking the mutant down to the floor. He plunged his fist into its chest and got a good grip on its already dead heart, ripping it out with ease while its necrotic blood splattered against his armor. Despite the loss of a major organ, Chainsaw lunged up and tried to shoot its Medusa ray at the Slayer, but he grabbed its face with his free hand and raked his armored fingers across its eyes, gouging them out in the process. The Nomu screeched horrifically, and the Slayer slammed his foot down on its chest hard enough to break its ribcage as he reloaded his sawed-off. I recommend you destroy the exposed cerebral matter to fully terminate the Nomu. No shit. That was a literal no-brainer. No pun intended. Chimera charged in before the Slayer could stomp Chainsaw's head into paste as he tackled him, locking him in a tight grip and knocking the sawed-off out of the Slayer's hands. The Slayer was getting really pissed for being constantly interrupted and responded by pulling out his EMG pistol, firing multiple shots into Chimera's collarbone. Despite the slugs ripping through his body, Chimera's transformed state gave him increased tolerance to pain and blasted another flame beam at the Slayer up close. He was finally slammed into a wall, and the Doomslayer pistol whipped Chimera across the face. The sounds of cracking skull were audible to all. Mummy and Slice moved in with the bandaged mercenary scooping up the Slayer's super shotgun. Slice wrapped her hair fists around his arms to bind him, but he instantly ripped himself free just as Mummy hopped up onto Chimera's shoulders. Before Mummy could fire the double-barreled death dealer against his visor, the Hellwalker grabbed the weapon and pointed it down at Chimera's shoulder just as Mummy stupidly pulled the trigger. The discharge blew a massive chunk out of Chimera's shoulder and caused him to loosen his grip on the Slayer, who slammed his knee upwards into his jaw. A right hook knocked Chimera away from him, followed up by another super shotgun blast to his chest that sent him flying into a column and throwing Mummy to the ground. Just as he swapped out his sawed-off for his combat shotgun, Slice swung a giant, blade-covered fist made of hair at him, but the Slayer easily caught it with one hand. Slice gave him no reprieve when she sent another blade at him that split into scorpion-like stingers. But like before, it was a fruitless effort as the stingers were unable to penetrate the Praetor's suit, bouncing off of his body as he wrestled with Slice's other appendage. He aimed his shotgun at Slice, but a wave of ice suddenly swept across the floor, encasing the Slayer in ice up to his neck, just as Slice yanked her hair arm away from him. The ice came from Nine, who then started hurling lightning bolts at the Doomslayer, detonating on impact in electrical explosions that shook the atrium. Slice transformed her hair into a weapon resembling a multi-barreled machine gun with a chainsaw grip. Depressing the trigger, the barrels spewed a stream of razor-sharp needles at the Slayer, as Nine continued to throw more lighting blasts at him. Chimera furiously forced himself up despite the searing pain he just endured and unleashed a stronger version of his incendiary beam at the Doomslayer, the blast now kicking up dust from the chaos. Mummy ran over to a 19 Malawian Quatch's grenade launcher emplacement near the ruined ammo depot and manned it, unleashing a barrage of 40mm grenades at his target. The villains continued their unrelenting assault upon the unchained predator as the explosions destroyed the far end of the atrium. After a full minute, they ceased their attack and caught their breaths. Around this time, Chainsaw picked itself up, though the injuries it received were signaling the end of its wretched life. Everyone gazed at the dust cloud that covered the other end of the room. The only sound was the rubble and debris rolling across the ground. There was no movement, until the boogeyman of hell emerged from the smoke unharmed. He didn't run out of the cloud or charge straight at them. He opted for slowly walking out of the smoke while lazily holding his shotgun. It wasn't because he was bored, It was because he wanted to introduce a little psychological warfare upon Nine and the others. It was a little trick he picked up from his Special Forces days. Mess with his enemy's head and show them just how utterly fucked they were. And judging from the freaked-out expressions the villains had on their faces, they got the message. With his combat shotgun outfitted with the explosive shot mod, he started his assault by launching grenades at the last remnants of the steel sabers while rapidly pumping his shotgun to fire as many explosives as he could. Nine and his lieutenants quickly scattered to avoid the explosions while still mentally reeling from the fact their previous attacks did nothing to stop him. He lobbed several of his handheld grenades against them in succession, splitting the group up as they avoided the explosions. The Slayer noticed Mummy and Slice were separated from the group at the other end of the atrium. Now he could take out the weakest members of the posse. He fired a grenade from his shotgun at the base of the now damaged Atlas statue, causing it to crumble and sending the stone globe toppling towards Nine, Chimera, and Chainsaw, who dove out of the way. The Doomslayer charged toward Mummy and Slice with killing intent as his heavy footsteps heralded their doom. Slice responded by twisting her hair until it formed a giant pneumatic drill and thrust it towards the Slayer, who punched it out of his way, causing her to panic. Mummy quickly used his bandages on the chunks of rubble to form an army, but the Slayer instantly aimed his shotgun at him, and with a quick pull of the trigger, blew Mummy's right leg off at the knee. As Mummy screamed in horrible pain while clutching his stump, the Slayer rapidly closed the distance between himself and Slice. She sent out a flurry of spikes from her hair while letting it loose with her machine pistols, but as the projectiles ricocheted off of the Slayer's armor, her fate was sealed. Putting away his shotgun, the Slayer grabbed a fistful of her hair and forcefully tore the skin off her head so hard that it also ripped away her muscles and left only her bare skull. Slice shrieked like an animal in torment as she pawed at her bloody skull, while her exposed eyeball stung like holy fuck due to the open air. Her agony was thankfully brief as the Slayer grabbed her by the leg and struck her down to the ground, bursting her head apart when her skull impacted with the floor. Watching the scene in complete terror over the death of his comrade, Mummy swiftly used his bandages to create a replacement leg. Even though the blood loss was starting to make his vision hazy, Mummy had enough strength to draw his sword and leap at the Slayer with his weapon clutched in both hands. Mummy raised his subsonic sword over his head and swung it down on top of the Doomslayer's skull, and it snapped in half as soon as it made contact with his helmet. Before Mummy's brain could even register what the hell just happened, the Slayer snatched the broken half of the blade out of the air and swiped it across Mummy's throat, slicing his neck wide open. Mummy gurgled painfully as a gout of blood sprayed from the open gash in his neck. But his suffering was only just the beginning as the Slayer grabbed him by the face and leg, hoisting the dying mercenary over his head. The Doomslayer slammed Mummy down upon his knee with so much force that it caused his abdomen to explode outwards, showering the Slayer with his blood and entrails, followed by tearing the body in half. Nine and Chimera bore witness to this horror. He dispatched their comrades so quickly it was already over by the time they could help them. Seeing the two stare at him, the Slayer rubbed salt into the wound by throwing the upper half of Mummy's corpse into a pile of debris, a jagged slab of rock spearing through his face. "Motherfucky year," Chimera snarled as he charged at the Slayer in reckless fury. The Slayer drew his combat shotgun and launched several grenades his way, the Wolfman dodging a few of them before one detonated in his right side. Chainsaw joined the fray while Nine remained behind and fiddled with his wristband. This time, he was going plus ultra. Chainsaw barfed another glob of acid at the Slayer, who barreled through the ooze and back-fisted the saw as Chainsaw swung at him before running his fist straight through its upper jaw and out of the back of its exposed brain, finally killing the Nomu once and for all. As he pulled his fist out, Chimera came up from behind the Slayer and tried to take his head off with his claws. The Slayer instantly swapped out his shotgun for his sawed-off, aimed over his shoulder, and blew Chimera's right hand into bits. The Doomslayer then whirled around and punched Chimera so hard in the gut it ripped past his ribcage and lungs, out the back of his body, and sent him flying towards the other end of the room. As soon as Chimera hit the other wall, the Slayer tossed one of his grenades at him, and the mercenary was enveloped in an explosion when it neatly fell onto his lap. A strong gust of wind and the crack of thunder got his attention as the scattered rubble around the room was being covered in ice. Slowly turning behind him, the Slayer was treated to the sight of Nine levitating several feet in the air via a miniature tornado underneath his feet. His arms were now encased in ice, giving him lanky arms that ended in curved talons. Lightning crackled between his hands as well as his hair, while his eyes were glowing with purple energy as a result of his suit supercharging his quirk to a dangerous level. 6 pylons jutted out of the back of his armor as the wind began to lift scattered chunks of the destroyed atrium around him. I have carried out dozens of operations without fail, amassed an army of trained soldiers, and killed dozens of this stagnant society's false paragons. I will not lose to some no-name vigilante. Nine shouted angrily at the Slayer as the wind and thunder grew with intensity. The Doomslayer was not impressed. This baby gets pummeled a couple of times, lost some of his flunkies, and now he was going all out just so he could preserve what was left of his tattered pride. How the fuck did the heroes have so much trouble nabbing this guy? A deep rumble from behind interrupted his thoughts as he peered over his shoulder to see a large, reptilian creature emerge from the cloud of smoke, where Chimera previously got blown up. It was Chimera, only he had transformed into a fucking Tyrannosaurus Rex with blue and black scales, a large horn on the tip of his snout, Stegosaurus scuts running down the length of his back down to his tail, which ended in a spiky thagomizer, and tusks protruding out of the corner of his mouth. Okay. Chimera roared as spittle flew from his toothy maw while he flexed his arms, which were not the tiny arms of a Tyrannosaurus, but rather the arms of a scythe-clawed Therizinosaurus. He completely lost all sense of rational thought and reasoning. Now he's been overtaken by pure animal instincts and primal rage. Also, his wounds were once again healed. Doing a double take between the empowered Nine and the fully monstrous Chimera, the Doomslayer clenched his hands into fists. Finally, some excitement. Nine clasped his hands together and then fired beams of pure electricity from both of his palms at the Slayer, who dodged the beams and drew his HAR, breaking away the ice covering it. Chimera stomped over towards the Scourge of Hell with his claws outstretched, forcing the Slayer to divert his attention away from Nine and focused fire on the monstrous Chimera instead. The 50 caliber bullets and micro missiles surprisingly did little against his scales as Chimera lunged forward with his maw wide open. The Slayer double jumped into the air just as Chimera snapped down upon him and landed right on his nose, tightly gripping his horn as Chimera roared furiously. The beast swung his head to and fro while violently thrashing his body around to dislodge the Slayer, but the Juggernaut wouldn't budge, and he responded by popping out Chimera's eye with his HAR. As Chimera bellowed in pain, Nine tossed a barrage of thunderballs at the Slayer, completely uncaring about hitting Chimera in the process. The orbs of electricity did little to nothing against the Slayer's predator suit, but did cause Chimera to convulse when they impacted with his scaly hide. The Slayer fired at Nine with surprising accuracy despite being jostled around, and the mercenary leader was forced to zip around the room on his tornado platform while creating a tower shield made of ice, but bullets were already ripping through his shield, and he was hit across his armor. The bullets didn't penetrate through the plating, but the impacts rattled his already damaged body, and the armor was now beginning to crack in several places. The Slayer dispensed his HAR into his backpack and ran across Chimera's face to his back. He grabbed a hold of one of Chimera's scuts with both hands, tore it straight out of the dinosaur's back, and threw it at Nine like a discus. Nine tried blasting the scute with a charged bolt of lighting, but it was flung at him with so much force that the bolt dissipated upon impact. Nine summoned another ice shield to protect himself, and the scute slammed into the shield, embedding itself into the reinforced ice. However, it did not stop the momentum, and Nine was slammed into the nearest column and broke pieces of his armor. As he coughed up blood, Nine watched the Doomslayer jump up into the air and slam his feet down on Chimera's head, springboarding himself up towards where he was. Nine, almost panicked, tried to blast him with a tornado, but the Slayer grabbed Nine by both of his feet and threw him down into the ground. The marble tiles cracked as Nine crashed on the floor, his body in terrible pain and his eyes blurry with double vision. The Slayer landed against Nine with his fists raised in the air and slammed them down on Nine's chest, shattering the whole frontal portion of his armor. Blood splashed on the Slayer's visor from Nine hawking it up, and the Slayer responded by grabbing a large chunk of destroyed armor and bashing it across Nine's face. The The Slayer continually pounded it against the side of Nine's head, but that's when Chimera charged and spun around, swinging his Thagomizer at him. The Slayer dropped the armor piece and grabbed Chimera's tail, swinging him around before throwing him at the wall to the left just as Nine rolled out of the way. Nine forced himself up to his feet, his ice claws twitchy and the side of his face horribly maimed. Everything hurt in so many unimaginable ways as he glared at the Slayer who had his back turned to him. Then the Slayer slowly turned himself around to face Nine, and the villain immediately staggered backward. The Doomslayer could see the look of fear written all over Nine's face as he coughed up blood. Now the bastard could see just how grossly outclassed he was. But apparently, pride was already proving to be Nine's undoing when he unleashed an enraged scream of desperation as he lunged forward and began slashing away at the Slayer with his ice claws wreathed in electricity. But the Doomslayer did not retaliate nor dodged. He just stood there tanking the blows without so much as budging an inch. He wanted to let Nine know that this was the end. All of those heroes Nine killed, whose only sole purpose in life was to defend the innocent, would finally be avenged. A roar from Chimera forced the Slayer to glance behind him while Nine was still hacking away at his impenetrable armor to see the Tyrannosaur monstrosity lumber towards him. Rolling his eyes, the Slayer slammed his open palm into Nine's chest, rupturing a lung and sending him spiraling across the atrium. The Slayer turned to face Chimera, who scooped him up with his jaws and swallowed him. Still inside his mouth, the Doomslayer punched his way out of Chimera's maw in a single blow, sending his teeth flying. Chimera released an ear-piercing roar of pain as the Slayer hopped out of his mouth and sent the beast flying into the air with an uppercut to the jaw. As Chimera crashed back to the ground, the Slayer picked up a nearby destroyed column and easily wielded it like a bat. The second Chimera picked himself up, he was battered across the face with the column unrelentingly. The Doomslayer slammed his massive club across Chimera's head again before swinging it right into his right leg, breaking it like a twig and causing his broken leg bone to tear out of his skin. The Doomslayer raised the column over his head as Chimera screeched horribly before slamming it down upon his face and shattering his horn into pieces as well as the column. Chimera suddenly sprang forward and swiped at the Slayer, but he dove out of the way and jumped up onto Chimera's face. As the monster tried to shake him off, the Slayer grabbed one of Chimera's tusks and yanked it straight out of his mouth. Chimera's eyes went wide as he unleashed a deafening, pained roar while the Slayer clambered up on top of his head and began brutally stabbing his face. Over and over again, the Doomslayer relentlessly thrust the tusk onto the open wound where Chimera's horn used to be, causing no amount of unbearable suffering for the creature as blood sprayed from the wound he inflicted upon him. The final stab nearly speared down through Chimera's upper jaw, and the Tyrannosaurus flung the Slayer off of him just as he yanked the tusk out. His senses overwhelmed by the sheer pain he was in, Chimera snapped his right leg back into place and stomped towards him with the intent to shred him apart with his claws. Taking aim, the Slayer hurled the tusk at Chimera, and it pierced straight through his chest and out of his back where it embedded itself on the wall. Chimera stood still as blood flowed from his mouth like a waterfall. Uttering a dying groan, the creature finally fell to its side and ceased breathing. The Slayer relaxed his shoulders in satisfaction, and now there was only one saber left to avenge all of those fallen heroes. He parried the ice spear thrown at him and made a beeline towards Nine, who started firing lightning blasts at the Slayer despite the increasing evidence that his attacks were having no effect. Nine lashed out with his claws, and the Slayer smashed the left one to pieces before grabbing the right one and ripping it off, exposing both of Nine's real arms. The Merc leader instantly blasted a literal tornado at the Slayer. The force pushed him back a little. Rocketing himself up into the air via a gust of wind, Nine created a massive, glowing orb of pure condensed electricity over his head that grew larger with each passing second. The unyielding Slayer didn't bat an eye. Judging from how brightly the pylons on his back were glowing, Nine was using all of his power reserves for one final attack. He was about to draw his shotgun, but to his surprise, Nine immediately threw the oversized orb of death at the Slayer. It was so fast that it was already upon the Slayer, and the second it collided against him, he was engulfed in a thunderous explosion that nearly swallowed up the entire atrium. Streaks of lightning carved deep fissures across the ground, while bolts lashed throughout the room, cutting through anything in their path. The tower shook from the blast as Nine avoided the flying debris thrown around the room. He landed himself on the ground, watching the steaming crater in the center of the room obscured by smoke. Small crackles of electricity in the air were visible to the naked eye, with a dull hum echoing throughout the room. Nine panted heavily. The battle and overuse of his power-up had taken a massive strain upon his body. He wiped the blood away from his mouth and activated his wristband device to turn off his suit's amplification functions before causing further damage to his body. Suddenly, a sharp object punctured straight through the superconductor on his back. A surge of electricity coursed through Nine's veins as muscles seized up painfully. He let out a yell of agony as he frantically tried to pry the conductors off of his back as his body spasmed with each jolt of electricity. Tiny stalagmites of ice tore their way out of his skin as his overloaded quirk ripped his body apart, until he finally tore off what was left of his suit and threw it on the ground. As he caught his breath, something shot out of the smoke, and Nine felt 3 piercing sensations penetrating his body. Looking down in disbelief as blood flowed from his mouth, he saw 3 of Chimera's teeth embedded into his chest. As Nine fell to his knees, the Slayer emerged from the crater completely unscathed and clutching some of Chimera's teeth that he snagged nearby before the orb struck him. The Doomslayer dropped the teeth as he continued to slowly walk towards the dying mercenary leader. A seemingly invincible Chimera sprang back from the brink of death and charged at the Slayer in a berserker fury. The Doomslayer responded by smoothly arming himself with his chain gun, replacing the Gatling rotator with the mobile turret, and aimed at Chimera. With a press of the trigger, Chimera's face was shredded apart by a literal storm of bullets from the roaring triple barrels of the Slayer's chain gun. His lower jaw was the first to get sawed off by the high-speed gunfire, followed by his face getting perforated and sending his remaining eyeball and brain matter splattering out of his skull. His bones were splintered into shards as the tungsten rounds shattered them like they were glass. The last of Chimera's head exploded into mist as his titanic body toppled over, but the Slayer continued to hose the upper half of Chimera's body with his chain gun, the barrels of the mobile turret glowing red-hot as a small pile of bullet casings started to form near the Slayer's feet. His ammo reserves finally ran dry, and the barrels ceased spinning. All that was left of Chimera was a mutilated corpse of a Tyrannosaur's hybrid reduced to dinosaur ground beef as steam rose from his exposed, bullet-riddled guts. Satisfied with the prehistoric pain in the ass for being finally dead, the Great Slayer put away his chain gun and resumed his walk towards Nine. Nine was hunched over with more blood pouring from his open mouth as he heard the vigilante's heavy footsteps growing closer. In a fit of rage and desperation, Nine pressed a button on the undamaged part of his armor near the leg areas, opening a secret compartment that held his Taurus Raging Judge revolver. He pointed his gun at the Slayer, but he swiftly grabbed his hand while having his finger blocking the trigger, preventing Nine from even firing a shot. The Doomslayer viciously broke Nine's arm hard enough to cause his radius and ulna to tear out of the length of his limb. Nine screamed at the top of his lungs, and even louder when the Slayer twisted his wrist around so that his gun was now pointing at him. He then shoved the barrel of the Taurus right into Nine's mouth as the last Saber's eyes bugged out of his head. HHHHGGGGGGKK. Alwich. Hurk, as he tasted metal in his mouth while the barrel poked the back of his throat. The Slayer leaned in close enough so that he and Nine were at eye level. Nine saw his frightened, helpless visage in the Slayer's visor, but then he saw something else behind his reflection. He saw the man's eyes. No mercy, no soul, no humanity, only death. The Doomslayer pulled the trigger, and the back of Nine's head exploded in a burst of gore as the hollow point bullet ripped through the back of his skull. Nine's eyes rolled into the back of his head as blood seeped from his tear ducts while his brain, whatever was left of it, slopped out of the back of the gaping hole in his head. The Slayer released his grip on Nine and let his body fall to the floor. He gazed over the dead bodies of Mummy, Slice, Chimera, and finally Nine himself. The deed was done. The steel sabers were no more, and he had prevented any more heroes from being killed by these murderers. He silently exhaled through his nose, knowing that the 246 heroes slain by the sabers could finally be at peace. God rest their souls. In that instant, a visage of the Khan Maker flashed before his eyes, and his shoulders hitched a little. Long-buried memories of his time on Argent Nur, and with the Khan emerging from the darkest corners of his mind. Argent Nur many eons ago. Angels? Why, you're really? Yes, Corporal Flintaggart. But not just any angels. We are true archangels of the sacred kingdom of Urdak. We are the only holy beings who answer the universe's prayers. Now, what are these demons you speak about, and why are they the source of your malaise? Island's central tower present day. The Slayer blocked out the image from his head and calmed himself down. Back before he joined the army, he was brought up as a Roman Catholic after his mother, Catherine Taggart, encouraged him to attend a 4-year scholarship at Catholic school when he was young. Those 4 years had made him into a better person with a strong belief in God, which in turn inspired him to join the Special Forces when he got older. He always thanked his mother for the opportunity she gave him. But when the demons invaded Mars and Earth of his home dimension, he found his faith greatly strained. After choosing to remain in hell to prevent the demons from staging another assault on Earth, he was starting to believe that it was a test from God. After arriving on Argent Nur and meeting the Makers, he was somewhat conflicted about how disturbing these angels looked. And finally, when he and the other Night Sentinels discovered that the Makers were just as evil as the demons, his faith was shattered. But not completely. If this universe had a heaven, he hoped it wasn't anything like Urdak. The Slayer snapped himself out of his funk and focused back on the matter at hand. The steel sabers were wiped out, but there was still the matter of the LOV and the hostages. Looking up towards the only security camera in the atrium, the Doomslayer drew his EMG pistol and scraped it with a well-placed shot. The Slayer put away his sidearm as his eyes soon landed upon his blood-stained hands. Turning to a bare, undamaged wall in the atrium, the Doomslayer got an idea. He knew that his actions wouldn't be kept secret and every villain in the world would know what he had done here. And if that was the case, he wanted every single villain to know what he was capable of. He walked over to Chimera's corpse, dunked his hand in his entrails to get it thoroughly soaked in blood, and made his way over to the wall. Island's central tower main server room. Curator was expressionless while many of the occupants in the room displayed outright terror after the vigilante destroyed the camera recording the whole fight. The second-in-command of the LOV was heavily impressed by this vigilante's brutality and how he dispatched the sabers and chainsaw. It was a level of violence that seemed to echo Stain the Hero Killer, but on a much greater magnitude. But this was not the time for idle musing. Curator had a schedule to keep, and that man was going to come for them. "We're done here," Curator announced to Wolfram and his crew as he pointed at Melissa. "Take her." Nobu grabbed her by the neck as he dragged her over to the door. "No," David yelled as he scrambled after her. "Take me instead, Dash." Specs smashed the butt of his Scar assault rifle across David's face, knocking him unconscious and sending the scientist flopping against the console. Melissa cried out her father's name despite everything he had done and was promptly silenced when Nobu smacked her across the face. Curator, Wolfram, and the others walked through the halls at a quickened pace as Curator held up his wrist-mounted communicator. "Volcano, come in. Do you read?" "Yeah, I read ya. We're leaving Island." "So soon?" "What's? Oh shit, they're all dead, aren't they?" "Quite messily, to be exact. Have you secured the headset?" "Don't worry, I got it. It was a bitch to melt through the door, but Sam got us what we need." "Splendid. Have Ash and Gust given you an update on the rocket?" "They're close to being done." "Good enough. Meet us on the roof. And before I forget, we won't be needing Sam's assistance anymore." "Sure, I gotcha." Curator turned off his communicator and resumed his path to the roof. Wolfram gave him a nasty look. "You have something to say? Why the fucking hell aren't we killing All Might? He's still tied up in the ballroom. We can finish him off." Wolfram argued. All for One was very specific about his orders regarding All Might. Retrieve the headset, demoralize David, and let the VX kill him. Curator responded. Another thought came to mind. That, and I would prefer to keep as much distance between us and that vigilante as much as possible. Island's central tower main vault. Carefully popping open the briefcase, Maguma checked over the quirk amplification headset, and it looked as pristine as the day it was made. The things All for One could do with it came with endless possibilities. It was the perfect device for bringing forth all for one's vision of a new society without heroes. Volcano locked the briefcase back up, slung it over his shoulder, and left the vault while whistling a cheery tune to himself, while also leaving behind the melted, lava-covered skeleton of Samuel Abraham. Port of Tokyo Warehouse District. With the fires put out, the pro-heroes could now focus on preparing to retake Island. Tiger and Ragdoll arrived at the port with their heavy-duty, cat-themed rescue boats a few minutes ago. Each of the vessels was big enough to carry a dozen or so personnel along with the latest in rescue equipment and technology. As the pro-heroes boarded the rescue boats, they all mentally readied themselves for the task at hand. They didn't know what was waiting for them on Island, and every single one of them knew that it would test all of their abilities and their oaths as heroes. But they were still worried about fighting the vigilante who, in the span of a few hours, caused untold destruction and chaos on Island. Midnight was the most rattled out of all of them. The sight of a bisected body on top of her still fresh in her mind, and her costume was still stained with blood. While everyone was getting ready, a few heroes broke off from the group and gathered in another section of the port. "Susu, walk me through this again?" Maruko questioned Best Jeanist as Hawks, Eraserhead, Ryukyu, and MT Lady stood close by. "The main airport has a communications array. If we can get someone there ahead of us for reconnaissance, that will provide valuable intel for us. That's where you come in," Best Jeanist explained as he ran a comb through his luxurious hair. "Does this have anything to do with me not reporting that guy sooner?" Maruko tiredly guessed as her ears drooped. She was getting tired of being reminded of how much she screwed up regarding the vigilante. Not in the slightest. Jeanist held up his hands. "Eraserhead and I have discussed it over, and you're the best candidate to reach Island due to your incredible jumping ability." Maruko looked over at the speck of the island out in the distance and tapped her foot. "Okay, but isn't Island almost 5 miles away? Sure, I can jump far, but I'm going to need a really long running start, and we're kind of pressed for time. Also, wouldn't it be easier for Hawks or Ryukyu to fly me over there instead?" she suggested. "If we're going to be fighting that vigilante, then we need to conserve our energy. The Pussycat's ships are equipped with thrusters that can get us to the island far faster than us flying heroes." Hawks answered her with her arms folded. "Luckily, that's where MT Lady comes in. She can get you to Island before us." Eraserhead jabbed a thumb over to the giantess heroine. "Oh, I was wondering why you guys brought me over here. Come to think of it, what can I do?" A perplexed MT Lady asked her companions. "If I recall, you once told me that you were the top pitcher in baseball while you attended middle school." Ryukyu reminded her. "Remember, during our little outings on patrol?" "Yeah, but what does that have to do with Oh, I see." MT Lady snapped her fingers after piecing together what Ryukyu was getting at. "No problem. I always give Kimui Woods a little extra boost when we're chasing a villain together dash." MT Lady instantly stopped her boasting when she realized what she was implying. Yu's face turned as red as a tomato as she nervously looked at the others. Maruko and Hawks had teasing grins. Ryukyu smiled with a light blush. Best Jeanist chuckled in amusement, while Eraserhead couldn't care less. Anyway," MT Lady stammered, desperately finding a way to change the subject. "Are we going to do this or not?" Maruko did some leg stretches to prepare herself. "I am so frickin' pumped. By the way, I kinda have to put a lot of strength into my jump when you throw me, so sorry in advance if I accidentally break your wrist." "What?" MT Lady balked. "Not to worry. I'll form you a reinforced glove with my fabric. Should be more than enough to absorb the impact." Best Jeanist calmed her down while manipulating the fabric in his clothes to coil around his fingers. Nodding apprehensively, MT Lady grew to her massive form and held out her hand. As the number 4 pro hero began to create a protective covering for her hand, Hawks, Ryukyu, and Eraserhead brought Maruko aside. "I know you don't exactly like being told to be careful." Ryukyu started off. "Look, if you guys are that worried about that head case, don't worry. We got caught off guard before, but now I'll be ready for him." Maruko grinned. "It's not just that it's—" Eraserhead trailed off, shifting uncomfortably. "Some of my students are over there." I dash. Maruko placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her expression one of reassurance. "Say no more. I'll make sure they're safe and sound. You can count on that." Aizawa nodded in relief before he and Ryukyu headed back to the boats. This only left Maruko and Hawks as best jeanists made the finishing touch to the giant glove for MT Lady. Seeing that they were preoccupied, Hawks scooted a little closer to his friend. Just try to keep your head in the game. Only focus on the hostages, the kids, and All Might. But whatever you do, above all else dash. What? Not fight the vigilante. Maruko silently snapped back at Hawks. I'm not going to let him get away while making me look like an idiot. I dash. Do not go back to being Tiger Bunny. Hawks finished with a no-nonsense tone of seriousness. Maruko's attitude went from heated to deflated in a second. She hung her head a little with an expression that was a mixture of shame and frustration. Ever since the vigilante began his rampage at the mall, she kept experiencing flashbacks to an identity she had buried with Kigo's help. Her tendencies were beginning to flare up again, but she had to try to keep it bottled up for her sake, as well as Hawks and everyone else. Ready whenever you are. MT Lady called out to Maruko, now kneeling while wearing Genius' specially made glove. Giving a nod to Hawks, Maruko hopped up into MT Lady's palm as the giantess stood up. Maruko crouched down, the muscles in her legs tensing up while MT Lady balled up her hand while being careful not to crush Maruko. She took aim at her target, did the wind-up, and flung her arm out with as much force as possible while opening her hand at the apex of her throw. In that instant, Maruko pushed her legs out and blasted out of Takayama's hand like a high-speed cannonball. A burst of air radiated from the combined forces of Maruko's jump and MT Lady's throw that nearly knocked over the two pro heroes standing nearby. Maruko sailed through the air like a bullet towards Island until she disappeared from view. Hawk stood near the edge of the pier while MT Lady shrunk back down and Best Jeanist gathered his fabric back. Hawks did not doubt her current position as the number 5 pro hero, but that still didn't stop him from being concerned for her well-being and mentality. Island's central tower bottom floor lobby. The doomslayer wiped away the blood on his hands as he marveled at his handiwork. This is how you make an impression. Stepping away from the wall, the slayer walked over to the corpse of Chainsaw and inspected its biological sauce. He didn't think he would come by a replacement for his previous implement of carnage so soon, but any chainsaw he found was as good as any. He flipped the body over, placed his foot on the base of his spine, and got a firm grip on 2 of the limbs protruding out of its back. He easily tore the arms out of their sockets and dispensed the severed appendages into his hammerspace backpack. He may be able to fashion them into weapons at some point in the future. The League of Villains is attempting the exfiltrate from Island. They have secured a hostage, and the rocket is close to completion. We must move out immediately. The Slayer didn't waste any more time while looking around for a way to get himself up to the top of the tower in the fastest way possible. He laid his eyes upon a nearby elevator and hatched a plan in his head. He walked over and effortlessly tore the doors open. The EMP from the detonation of the submarine has disabled all of the elevators. The Slayer humorously smirked. He enjoyed proving others wrong. Vega probably wouldn't see this part coming. Stepping inside the elevator, he punched off the top hatch and climbed up onto the top of the elevator cabin. The Doomslayer grabbed the lift cables, drew his super shotgun, and shot the end of the cable. In that instant, he was rocketed up the steel elevator shaft, while rapidly gaining momentum as the cable carried him upwards floor by floor. As he held on to the cable carrying him up the tower, he did not forget about the other hostages and All Might. If the number 1 hero was smart, he would stay out of his way. To be continued. Chapter 17. Rooftop Rumble. Island's central tower 3rd floor. Still hiding in the employee break room, the students of UA stood as still as statues. They had spent the last 30 minutes or so listening to the sounds of chaos outside, and then inside when they felt the tremors shake the tower. But soon it had stopped, and all that was left was silence. Is it over? Uraraka shakily asked, having finally recovered from her emotional breakdown. I don't know. Izuku answered uncertainly. Shoto and Mirio remained quiet, the normally stoic 1st year and professional 3rd year wearing expressions of fright. They had been taught of the dangers of heroism by their teachers and peers, but they were completely unprepared for the level of carnage wrought out this day. Kirishima clenched and unclenched his fists in frustration. This feeling of helplessness reminded him all too much of the day when he was too scared to help those high school girls being accosted by a literal giant, and it was only the timely arrival of Mina Ashido, who saved them from harm. But even she was just as scared as he was back then. That act of cowardice was, in Kirishima's point of view, his lowest point in life, and he did not want to experience that again. He was done sitting around. All right, that's it. We can't just keep hiding here forever, Kirishima heatedly exclaimed. Sooner or later that psycho is going to come up here and go after the hostages. We got to save them. The others looked at Kirishima and then at each other. We could try. Shoto nodded. We could at least free the heroes. And we could also rescue All Might too. If there's anyone who can stop that guy, it's him. Uraraka realized, starting to brighten up a little. As Kirishima and Shoto looked hopeful, Izuku was worried. While it was true that All Might could very well stop the vigilante's rampage, Midoriya knew that his mentor had been in his powered-up state for a prolonged period. That put tremendous strain on both Yagi's body and his quirk, not to mention that there was no way to tell if he had enough power to take on the vigilante. He dreaded to think what would happen if that maniac got to his currently immobilized mentor first before they did. Unbeknownst to Izuku, Mirio also knew of All Might's condition. His mentor, Sir Naitai, had secretly revealed to him All Might's identity and condition in the hopes that Mirio would carry on the legacy of the symbol of peace one day. But that was rendered moot one day when Yagi informed Naitai over the phone that he had already found a worthy heir for One for All. He didn't say who, but Naitai was more or less displeased. Mirio wasn't bothered at all, but rather curious to meet the person who Yagi passed him for. And yet, he isn't aware that the new heir was standing right next to him. Well, saving the hostages and the heroes should be our top priority, but we don't know if there's still any mercenaries patrolling the building. Mirio started. I'll go do some reconnaissance of the upper floors to see if fucking motherfuck. Everyone nearly had a heart attack when Bakugo suddenly sprang up from the couch like a rocket while howling curses. Bakugo stumbled around until he finally propped himself up near the knocked-over fridge. The human firecracker was breathing heavily with his bandaged head sporting a small bloodstain. His hazy eyes were darting left and right while his lips curled, baring his canines. Everyone took several steps away from him, and none of them dared to make any sudden moves. What the fuck happened to me? Start fucking talking, you extras. Bakugo wrathfully spat at them, his left eye twitching. Izuku was afraid to answer. Katsuki was in a bad place right now, and all it took was the wrong answer to set him off. God forbid if he looked outside the window. Well, you see, Kaken Izuku nervously began until Bakugo interrupted him. Spit it out, damn nerd. With Izuku reduced to a stuttering mess, Kirishima quickly filled Bakugo in. You got a pretty nasty head injury after that explosion, and you've been out for a while. We've been hiding in here ever since that vigilante started fighting the sabers. I think he's already killed them all. Izuku, Uraraka, Shoto, and Mirio went pale. After all of the gunfire and screaming over the last 2 hours, there was no way any of the mercenaries survived. Shoto cautiously glanced behind him towards the window, afraid of what would happen if Bakugo saw the river of death outside. His classmate was already in a very fragile state of mind right now, and the last thing they needed from him was a meltdown. So you've all been sitting here doing jack shit. Fuck this. Bakugo angrily shouted as he stomped over to the door until Mirio got in his way. What are you doing? I'm going to save All Might. What's it look like, Weird Eyes? But we still don't know if that vigilante is still out there. He could be on his way right now. Uraraka tried to reason with Bakugo. Then I'll kill him before that happens. Katsuki raged at her. No, catch on. You can't fight him. He's too dangerous. Izuku implored as he tried to restrain him. Fuck off, DKU. Bakugo snarled as he shoved him away. The whole group devolved into rampant yelling with Mirio and Shoto trying to stop Bakugo as he tried to push them aside. Izuku, Uraraka, and Kirishima tried to talk some sense into him. As the argument escalated, Vega silently observed the group from the security camera in the corner of the room. Earlier, Vega had calculated that the LOV would escape long before the doomslayer could reach them. While the AI did not doubt the Slayer's combative abilities, there was also the matter of the hostages. The Slayer could not fight the LOV and save the heroes at the same time. If he went after the League, there was a very high possibility of the hostages and the heroes being executed. If he went to the ballroom, the LOV would escape and launched the WMD. Vega was able to activate the emergency security doors to seal the exits and block off their escape route, but Volcano was easily melting through them with his magma quirk. The Slayer was still traveling up the elevator shaft, and since the building itself was 200 stories high, Vega needed to buy him more time. These heroes in training could be invaluable in preventing the League from escaping before the Slayer could arrive and terminate the villains. He already calculated that they had a high probability of survival after accessing their performance records from the high school servers. This argument is detrimental to your current predicament, The scuffle grounded to a screeching halt as everyone jolted when they heard the synthesized voice seemingly speak from out of nowhere. As the rattled teens looked around the room for the source of the voice, the TV came to life by itself and played a jingle as a circular symbol appeared on the screen. Hello. Everyone looked like a deer caught in the headlights as they stared at the TV, which was now talking to them. Hi. Uraraka innocently waved, unsure of how to reply. The others looked at each other in confusion. They had no clue what was going on anymore. I do not have the luxury of explaining to you of who or what I am, but know this. I am here to help you. The League of Villains will soon leave Island, but not before activating a weapon of mass destruction that will kill everyone on the island. You must stop them. A WMD? Kirishima jumped back as the others did the same. Wait, the League of Villains are here. Izuka gasped. They were working alongside the Steel Sabers to steal the quirk amplification headset, a support item that enhances the wearer's quirk. Future production of the device was halted by the HPSC, who deemed it too dangerous, and the only functional model was stored in the tower's main vault. They have already acquired the device. The TV immediately switched to camera footage of a group of villains standing in a hallway before a bulkhead door, with one of them blasting a stream of lava from his hand at the door. They got Melissa Shield, Mirio exclaimed as he pointed at the one villain restraining the struggling girl. Izuku felt his blood run cold. Shoto tensed when he recognized the magma-spewing villain. It was Volcano, the leader of the titular Volcano Thieves. Many years ago, back when he was a little kid, his father engaged in battle with this dangerous villain. Endeavor was easily outmatched by Volcano due to his quirk being far more powerful than Hellflame, and his father would have died that day were it not for the timely arrival of All Might. But Volcano and his minions escaped, leaving Esaha City a magma-flooded disaster zone and Enji half dead. His father was livid at the news that he was defeated by a villain, even more so when he had to be saved by All Might. He never got over that terrible day, and as usual, he took his anger out on the family. I am updating your cell phones with a map of the building. I will pinpoint an ideal route that will allow you to circumvent the League and prevent their departure. The phones belonging to each of the UA students, save for Kirishima, who was only in his underwear, began to ring, and they all pulled them out of their pockets. Their screens showed a comprehensive layout of the floors above them, along with a moving red blip that had to be the LOV. You must intercept them quickly, and you'll have my assurance that the hostages in the ballroom will be unharmed. He will ensure their safety and eliminate the guards. He. Izuku repeated as he looked up from his phone. Who are you talking about? Izuku felt dead consume his entire being when he instantly put the pieces together to who this mysterious contact was referring. The others were having the same reaction. They were supposed to leave the lives of the hostages and All Might in the hands of a madman. Bakugo wasn't having any of it. Hey, Screwback, what makes you think we're gonna do what you say, huh? Who the fuck are you? The TV instantly shut itself off, leaving a black screen with Bakugo's fuming expression visible on the glass reflection. Why? Bakugo snarled as he slammed his fist on the TV, cracking the screen. Before anyone could ask who just contacted them, Izuku bolted out the door and ran down the hallway. His mind was racing as he rushed through the building. He had no time to question if that contact was trying to help them or why they were affiliated with the vigilante, but the only thing that did matter was the LOV was going to set off a WMD, and they had Melissa in their clutches. The rational part of him was telling him not to follow the orders of someone who was in cahoots with a mass-murdering psychopath, but the selfless side of him was encouraging him to save Melissa and stop the League of Villains. He chose the selfless side. Deku. Izuku heard Uraraka call out to him as she and the rest of the group caught up to him. You're going after the League? We have to. I won't let them destroy this island and everyone on it. Izuku answered hastily as he pulled his phone out and followed the map on the screen. This way. But what about the hostages? We can't just leave them there with that vigilante, and our friends are still in there. Shoto pointed out. Izuku gulped worriedly. He was right. They couldn't just leave them undefended if that madman came up here. Leave it to me and Bakugo. Kirishima volunteered as he held up his hand. If we can free All Might and the other heroes, they could help us fight the League and that vigilante. Who the hell said I was going with you, shitty hair? Bakugo elbowed him in the shoulder. I decide what I'm doing next, dash. Oh, shut up and let's go save them. It's this way. Kirishima interrupted Bakugo before grabbing him by the scruff of his dress shirt and dragging him along. The fuck? Let me go, shitty hair. I'll kick your fucking ass. Bakugo furiously flailed his arms around, Kirishima's hardened grip preventing him from escaping. Everyone's sweat dropped as they watched their friend drag the screaming hothead down towards the opposite hall. Are they going to be okay? Mirio inquired, convinced that Katsuki was mentally unstable. They'll be just fine. They can handle the guards, believe me. Izuku assured him, knowing that those two were very skilled with their quirks. He glanced down at his phone to check the map. We'll take the next right, and then head up towards the emergency stairwell. They all followed the route, and soon found themselves running up the stairway as fast as they could. They considered themselves lucky because they weren't on the lower floors, or they would have never made it. Reaching the door at the top of the stairwell, Mirio used his quirk to phase his face through the door and scan the area. It was a drab, concrete hallway with a maze of pipes running along the ceiling. Mirio gave the thumbs up to the others, and they all cautiously walked through. They made a left down the hall, while keeping quiet to avoid detection until they came upon a door at the other end of the hall. As the teens moved up towards it, Izuku noticed something out of the corner of his eye. He glanced at the small window to his left and noticed several bright lights soaring up into the air from Island's airport. Izuku squinted at the lights as they drifted downwards from the sky. Flares? He quietly wondered. Izuku, are you coming? Shoto called out to him, snapping Midoriya back to reality. Why ya? Izuku quickly replied as he followed his friends. He wasn't sure who was launching those flares, but he hoped that it meant help was finally coming. They slowly opened the door and entered the room. It was a large storage room containing fuel drums, helicopter parts, and tool kits, most likely used for repairing and maintenance. At the far end of the room were rows of generators and the League of Villains. Everyone ducked behind the fuel drums and peered out a little to get a better view. The group of villains were in their line of sight, and so was a struggling Melissa as her captor held her by the neck. We still have some men in the ballroom. Swordkill reminded Curator. We're not even going to tell them that we're leaving. What about them? Curator answered in a detached, unpitying tone. They're just hired guns, Swordkill. Leave them. Wolfram callously waved his hand. Izuku and the others were incensed at that dismissal. Looks like there was truly no honor among thieves. As the villains were about to leave the room via the stairwell that led to the roof in the far corner of the room, the UA students quietly followed them while hiding behind the drums to conceal themselves. As they moved closer to ambush them, Uraraka tripped over a toolbox, and the sound of clattering wrenches alerted the villains. Specs spun around and spotted a group of teens yanking one of their own behind the fuel drums. Suppressing fire, Specs hollered at the top of his lungs as he let loose his Scar assault rifle, sweeping the weapon from side to side while spraying bullets everywhere. Swordkill, Daigo, and Nobu opened fire on them as well, the latter still restraining Melissa. Uraraka and Izuku cried out and ducked to the floor as much as they could behind the drums with Shoto and Mirio. The bullets whizzed over their heads and riddled the generators, causing them to explode in a burst of fire and sparks. The whole floor was plunged into darkness when the surge of electricity destroyed the overhead lights. The rounds penetrated the drums, spilling highly flammable fuel all over the ground and prompting the teens to flee when they saw the fuel was dangerously inching towards the flaming generators. Shoto created a wall of ice to shield his friends from the errant gunfire just as the fuel touched the fire. The flames raced up to the drums and detonated them in a large explosion that lit up the room. Shoto formed a dome of ice around everyone to protect themselves while the villains, sans Curator and Volcano, who already went up the stairs, were blown back from the blast along with Melissa. Are you dipshits trying to blow us up? Wolfram yelled at them while smacking them upside their heads as they tried to get themselves back up on their feet. He tightly grasped Melissa by the wrist and dragged her up the stairs with him. "Hold him off. We'll wait for you." Wolfram's underlings nodded, and they guarded the stairwell as their leader dragged Melissa along with him. Izuku could make out Wolfram fleeing with Melissa firmly clinched in his grip from inside the ice dome. "They're getting away." "They won't. You three go after the League. I'll hold these four off," Mirio instructed. "Are you sure you can take them on by yourself?" Uraraka asked out of concern. "My friends and I weren't called the Big Three at UA for nothing." Mirio cracked a smile with a twinkle in his eye. Izuku nodded and looked to his friends. Shoto summoned fire to form in his hands while Uraraka touched numerous objects and made them float. Izuku looked down his hand at the red, rectangular device he was wearing around his wrist. Melissa had outfitted him with the full gauntlet, an invention of her own design based on All Might's overwhelming strength. Izuku received this prototype support item from her earlier before the siege, and if his hypothesis was correct, then it could theoretically allow him to use the full power of One for All without causing harm to his body. He pressed the button on the wristband, and a series of intersecting metallic bands wrapped around the length of his hand, an arm up to the elbow. Izuku flexed his fingers before balling up his fist. Outside the dome, Wolfram's cronies cautiously inched towards them with their assault rifles at the ready. The frontal portion of the dome exploded outwards, and they were pelted with chunks of ice flying toward them. They had no chance to recover when an assorted flurry of debris and tools flew right into their faces. Nobu was whacked in the nuts with a pipe wrench. Izuku rocketed towards Swordkill, and Scissor kicked him in the face, while Shoto dove out into the open and fired a jet of flame at their weapons. This action superheated their rifles, and they were forced to drop them as the guns burned their hands. Daigo transformed into a hulking, purple-skinned brute and charged toward Shoto, only for Uraraka to touch several empty fuel drums and guided them to collide into Daigo's feet. The villain stumbled over them, allowing Shoto to hurl a fireball into his face while Uraraka manipulated the drums to fall on top of the other goons. Izuku bolted up the stairs as soon as he saw an opening, as did Shoto and Uraraka, who closely followed behind. "Little shits," Specs snarled as he pressed a button on the side of his goggles. The right side transformed into a rifle barrel while the left side functioned as a scope. He had his crosshairs focused on the back of Shoto's head and was about to fire a bullet out of his eye. Pow-ee-ee-ear. Mirio phased through the floor beneath Specs and uppercut him with enough force to knock off his goggles. As the others ran up the stairs, Nobu charged at Mirio and swung his large, webbed hands, ready to displace a chunk of the boy's body, but his hand went through him like he was a ghost. Mirio punched Nobu across the face and followed up by grappling him into a leg lock to disorient him. Swordkill turned his hands into blades and ran towards him with his blades aimed at his face, while Daigo let out a roar and swung his fist at him, but Mirio sunk into the floor to dodge the blows. Swordkill's blade raked across Daigo's chest just as the purple monster clocked him square in the face. Specs picked himself back up and tore off his goggles while Swordkill and Daigo reeled from their unintentional blows. Specs spotted Mirio emerging from the floor at the other end of the room and started firing bullets from his right eye just as Nobu got up and flung compressive gusts at the U-Data student. Mirio phased through the columns and thin drywalls to avoid the barrage of bullets and displacement blasts that tore up the environment. This added more chaos to the situation as more fuel drums exploded and the emergency sprinklers came on as a result. Just as Mirio phased through the last column, Daigo leaped towards him with his fists raised in the air with the intent to crush him into dust. Mirio easily phased through the brute's fists and caught him in a headlock before slamming him to the ground with a surprising amount of strength. Mirio jumped back just as Swordkill came in from the right and thrust his sword arm at him. Mirio took up a boxing stance as Swordkill glared him down, Nobu and Specs joining back up with him as Daigo got up with an angry grunt. "You fucking nudist. You think we're just going to let some first-year UA brat make a fool out of us?" Swordkill vented at the boy while his compatriots looked ready to fight despite the clear gap in quirks. "A nudist? Well, that's a common misconception. But I'm certainly anything but a first year." Mirio exuded confidence as he prepared himself for another scuffle as the flames danced around him while water rained down from the ceiling. Island's central tower rooftop. Up on the roof, the rest of the villains gathered at the helipad just as Dusty Ash and Gust Boy finished arming the VX missile. A light breeze swept across the roof, bringing the stinging scent of rot from the burning city. "We're all set," Dusty said as she and Gust walked over to them. "Missile launch will be in 3 minutes. More than enough time to get the hell out of here." "Good. Just get me as far away from this fucking island as possible," Wolfram grumbled as he still restrained Melissa, who struggled in vain to escape. "Didn't you just say to your dogs that we were going to wait for them?" Curator snidely reminded him. "Screw him," Wolfram shot back. He was completely done with everything that had happened today and just wanted to throw himself at AFO's feet and beg for another chance. "Wow, that desperate to run away from your tire fire of a mission, eh?" Gust Boy heckled, unaware of the veins popping up on Wolfram's head. "Can't wait to see how the boss'll chew you out this time." "Shut your fucking fuckhole, you inbred Daffy Duck," Wolfram roared into Gust's face, causing him to jump back in surprise. "If that armored freak never came here, then we could have been rolling in support items, and the steel sabers would have been eating out of our fucking hands." Before Wolfram could rage any further, he felt a large hand place itself on his shoulder. Wolfram cautiously looked behind him to see Volcano looming over him like a giant. "Look, Wolfie, I know my partner in crime can be a bit of a pain in the ass, no offense, but you let your overconfidence get the best of you, so this whole thing is on you. Whether or not you didn't know Sir Kills-a-Lot would throw a monkey wrench into the gears of your so-called master plan." Volcano's grip on Wolfram's shoulder tightened a little as his hand started to heat up. His tone of voice took on a dangerous tone. "Also keep in mind there's a limit to how many failures All for One can tolerate." "Quite so. You can save your excuses for All for One once we return. So until then, follow your orders like a good little boy." Curator mocked with a bored expression before turning his attention to Melissa, who froze when their eyes locked. "As for you, All for One has taken note of your rather impressive talents concerning the creation of support items, and your service for our cause will be invaluable." "I'll never make anything for you," Melissa yelled at him. Curator chuckled. "Oh, worry not, my dear. You will." "Let her go," a loud voice called out, causing the villains to turn towards the door where they came from. Izuku, Shoto, and Uraraka stood before them a distance away. The youths held an expression of determination, and they were ready to throw down at any given moment. Izuku briefly glanced to his right and saw an apocalyptic view. Smoke rising from the ravaged buildings and the streets running red with blood and dead bodies. He quickly focused back on the problem at hand, namely rescuing Melissa and stopping the LOV from destroying Island. The League, except for Wolfram, looked at the kids in amusement, impressed that someone was willing to fight several high-ranking villains. Curator smiled behind his mask as he studied the boy with green hair. "Izuku Midoriya. So this is the new bearer of One for All," he mentally observed. Volcano handed Dusty Ash the briefcase as he waltzed over towards the youths who backed away and took up stances. Placing his hands on his hips, the villain took pleasure in their state of fear. "So what's it going to be, kiddos? Are you going to die trying to be heroes, or are you going to do the right thing and just turn a blind eye?" He gloated. Nobody answered him and kept their distance, still ready to defend themselves if necessary. Maguma turned his attention over to Shoto and raised an eyebrow. "What about you, daddy's boy? Do I have to remind you of how I kicked your dad's ass up and down SA?" Shoto's hands balled into fists as he stared up at Volcano. He didn't want to be reminded about his abusive father at all. "Where is the WMD?" he demanded through his gritting teeth. "Well, wouldn't you like to?" Volcano stopped himself when he realized what Shoto just said. "Hold on, how the hell do know you about Dash?" While Volcano was preoccupied with Shoto, Izuku and Uraraka spotted a silver-colored cylinder on the far side of the roof out of the corner of their eyes and immediately assumed it was the WMD. In that instant, Izuku bolted towards the device with Uraraka flying alongside him. Their respective quirks gave them a significant speed boost. Shoto summoned a large wall of ice between him and Volcano, but a geyser of lava melted straight through the barrier. Izuku and Uraraka saw the jet of magma heading toward them, and the girl barely had enough time to grab Izuku and yank him out of the way as the stream missed them by inches. Volcano shattered the ice wall with his fist and slammed his boot into Shoto's abdomen when he tried to attack him. Todoroki could feel one of his ribs crack as he slammed into the far wall next to the exit. "Shoto!" Izuku called out just as a sudden burst of wind threw them off course, while a cloud of ash blinded them. The wind guided them back towards Shoto, and they were roughly slammed to the ground. Izuku and Uraraka were covered in ash as they coughed uncontrollably. Izuku painfully blinked away the ashes in his eyes and could make out the two villains grinning at him. Volcano shot another blast of lava at Midoriya and Uraraka, who avoided the downpour of lava to the left, backpedaling away from the pool of searing hot magma. Seriously? Is this the best UA has to offer? Man, they are really scrapping the bottom of the barrel. Volcano laughed victoriously. This has been an entertaining little show, but we really must get going, Curator said as he turned around, while Dusty Ash formed her ash platform. Maguma followed after them, but not before giving Izuku and his friends a mocking wave. "No, you're not getting away with this," Midoriya stubbornly shouted as he ran towards them, only to stop when Wolfram fired his pistol at the boy's feet. The villain then wrapped his arm around Melissa's neck and held her in front of him, using her as a shield while he pressed his gun to the side of her head. "Don't you fucking move. I will plug this bitch if you take another step," Wolfram threatened as he pushed the barrel of his weapon against the frightened girl. "Melissa!" Izuku exclaimed as Uraraka helped Shoto up. Izuku desperately wanted to save her, but he knew that one wrong move would lead to her death. He didn't know what to do. But suddenly, a white blur shot upwards into the air from behind the helipad. Wolfram and the other villains snapped their heads up towards the sky, giving Izuku just enough time to rocket himself towards Wolfram and deliver a right hook across his face. He then wrapped his arms around Melissa and jumped back towards his friends, but a livid Wolfram leveled his gun at him. Luckily, he didn't get the chance to pull the trigger when the object slammed back down right on top of him. The impact almost cracked the helipad in two and created a cloud of dust that obscured everyone's vision. Izuku and Melissa looked back towards the cloud of smoke, as did Shoto and Uraraka. A loud punching noise was heard, and Wolfram was hurled through the cloud and right into Dusty Ash, who dropped the briefcase containing the headset. "I heard a lot of commotion going on up here, and I just had to hop in on the action." A boisterous voice came from within the smoke screen as a pair of white rabbit ears popped up from the cloud. Izuku's face lit up when he recognized that voice and the unmistakable ears. The dust cloud dissipated to reveal the rabbit heroine herself. "You villains who are up to no good, prepare to be sent flying by me. Island Airport, 40 minutes earlier." Maruko had to squint her eyes as the wind blew against her face. She was still whistling through the air after MT Lady threw her, and she was having a very difficult time trying to straighten herself as she soared towards Island. She was able to make out an airport that was rapidly getting closer, so Maruko pivoted her body around mid-flight so that her feet were facing in front of her. Just as she was about to hit the ground, she thrust her feet right on the concrete. The force of the impact created a small crater with her footprints in the center. Wrenching her feet out of the ground, Maruko shook the discomfort out of her legs as she stepped over the sizable spiderweb crack she made. "Nailed it," she chirped. Her revelry was short-lived when she noticed the dead sabers scattered across the tarmac, some decapitated or had rebars impaled through their faces. Maruko shook her head to dispel any thoughts she was having and focused back on the mission. Looking up to the air traffic control tower, Maruko leaped up to the roof of the airport and crouched down before making a massive jump up towards the tower. She landed on the balcony and climbed through the broken window, hoping to use the console to radio her comrades. Unfortunately, what she saw caused her ears to droop. The sabers had already disabled the radios. Everything was riddled with bullets, and the consoles had been trashed. Silently cursing to herself, Maruko started thinking of another way to contact the heroes. But first, she had to investigate if there were any civilians in need of rescue. She took note of the door and windows of the airport being sealed off by bulkheads and decided that as much as she wanted to destroy them with a well-placed stomp, she did not want to accidentally hurt any hostages that were probably inside. Maruko jumped off the tower and upon landing on the ground, ran along the side of the building to search for an alternate entrance. She found an emergency exit with its doors slightly ajar and went through the exit to a corridor. She walked down the hallways until she saw bloodstains decorating the walls. She cautiously pressed onward, keeping her eyes open as she went past several inactive security drones. She noticed a supply closet with a large puddle of blood seeping from the bottom of the closed door. Swallowing, Maruko inched towards the door and opened it, backing away when a pile of dead sabers collapsed on the floor in a pile. Maruko gagged in disgust. The bodies were covered in blood and were either missing their heads or had their skulls split open via some inhumane method. Maruko nearly tripped over a deactivated drone when she staggered backward, but then noticed the cables that were connected to it were covered in blood. Looking back and forth between the drone and the bodies, she instantly connected the dots and was left confused. Why were the drones that were only programmed to subdue their targets started killing them instead? But Maruko decided to save the question for another time. She had to focus. She rushed past the dead bodies and continued through the airport until she found the entrance main terminal. Maruko could hear voices from behind the door as her sharp ears picked up the voices that didn't sound hostile, meaning that they had to be the hostages. She approached the entrance, and the sliding door automatically opened to reveal a frightened woman pointing a submachine gun at the heroine. Maruko immediately placed her hands up and stepped away from the woman. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold up a second. I'm a hero. A hero, Maruko quickly exclaimed. Komari's hyperventilated breathing started to slow down, and she lowered her weapon as relief spread across her face. Why you're, oh God. Oh, thank God. Her shoulders sagged as tears welled up in her eyes. She turned behind her to a group of people hiding behind a makeshift fort made out of luggage and airport chairs. Some of them were armed with weapons that used to be carried by the sabers. Everyone, they're here. The heroes are here. Cheers and shouts of joy were heard as the traumatized civilians embraced each other or clapped for their savior. Several of them left the barricade and crowded around Maruko, bombarding her with questions about if more heroes were coming or if the JSDF was going to be called in. Okay, just take it easy, folks. It's only me, but if I can find a way to contact the heroes back on the mainland, I can give them the okay to send in help. We're going to get this whole thing under control, and you'll all be safe. Maruko explained to the crowd, calming them down. In the meantime, you all need to stay here for your own safety. The civilians nodded in agreement and went back towards the rest of the group while two teenagers walked up to her. Hey, you're the rabbit heroine, right? Nijire guessed. The one and only. Maruko beamed with her hands on her hips. But this isn't the time for autographs if that's what you're asking. Oh, we were going to tell you that there's an emergency compartment on the second floor near the vending machines. Maybe you could find some flares. Those might help you signal the other heroes. Tamaki corrected her. Well, ain't that convenient? Thanks for the info. Maruko gave him a thumbs up before noticing their clothing. Those uniforms, are you kids from UA? Yup. Nijire confirmed in a chipper tone. Our friend was at the central tower before the sabers locked down the whole island. We also think they might be holding the rest of the hostages and All Might there. It does seem like the most obvious place. Maruko muttered to herself. She eyed the dead bodies of the steel sabers, some with combat knives embedded in them, while one had been split straight down the middle with a broken fire axe lying near the corpse. Did he come through here by any chance? Tamaki went rigid as he and Nijire looked at each other. Yes, he did. We even had a run-in with him. What? Did he do anything to you? Maruko immediately demanded. She swore, if that psycho did anything to these kids. No, he didn't do anything to us at all. Nijire assured Maruko that she and her friend were startled by the sudden outburst. I mean, the worst he did was glare at us threateningly. We wanted to stop him from going on another rampage, but we decided to protect the civilians instead. Tamaki admitted. Smart thinking, kids. Maruko praised as she patted Tamaki on the shoulder. You made the right call. Nijire smiled in response while Tamaki turned red, ready to curl himself up into a ball. Excuse me. Komari nervously made herself known as she walked up to Maruko. There's something you should know about that man. He saved my life. Maruko blinked several times in disbelief. Hold on, he saved you. As incredulous as it sounds, yes. Some of my students tried to fight back, but they were all rounded up. Komari explained as she motioned towards the group of school children huddled in a corner of the terminal. They dragged us upstairs. They were going to kill me and the children, but then he came and saved us. In a way, we owe him our lives, even if his methods were excessive. Maruko was at loss. An armored maniac with a chainsaw saved a bunch of kids and their teacher? The same nutcase who tore off Shigaraki's arm, blew up half a mall, pulverized her friends, and waged a one-man war against the infamous Steel Sabers? That was incredibly hard to believe, but the woman seemed like she was telling the truth. Okay, at least he's not a complete lunatic. Maruko shrugged, unable to find the right words to say. In any case, you and the kids are safe now. Smiling warmly, Komari nodded and went back over to the schoolchildren to comfort them. Maruko then turned her attention to Nijire and Tamaki. I have to get going, but I need you two to keep these people safe until the other heroes arrive. Can you do that for me? You can count on us. Nijire cheerily saluted while Tamaki smiled a little in response. Giving them a thumbs up, Maruko easily jumped up to the second-floor balcony and sprinted down the halls. She eventually came to a door near several vending machines and figured this had to be where the supply room was. It was locked, but Maruko easily remedied that by kicking the door straight off of its hinges. Entering the room, Maruko sifted through the metal cases around the cramped room for flares until one box caught her eye. Bingo! Maruko beamed as she finally found a rectangular plastic case with the word flare written in red on the side. When she opened the case, she was surprised to see not a tiny little flare gun, but rather a rotary grenade launcher that had been converted into an automatic flare launcher. Maruko hefted the weapon out of its case before picking up the silver-colored flare rounds and inspecting them. They were starburst flares with a high-yield illumination radius, perfect for grabbing just about anyone's attention. Maruko started loading the canisters into the 15-round drum mag of the flare launcher before running out of the room and jumping through a broken skylight in the hallway. She went over to the edge of the airport roof and could just barely make out the Port of Tokyo in the distance as she readied the flare launcher. Port of Tokyo. Hawks anxiously drummed his fingers on his knee as he sat in one of the Pussycats' rescue boats. Everyone else was waiting for Maruko to contact them and give them the okay to retake I-Island. Mandalay kept herself seated near the radio, just in case. Hawks looked back towards the island that still had columns of smoke rising from the buildings, and his mouth formed a thin line. Something troubling you? Eraserhead queried as he sat next to Hawks. You're the most laid-back pro hero I know of, so what got you so angsty? Hawks turned to Aizawa. If you want me to be truthful, I guess I'm a little worried about Rumi. I'll admit, her lone wolf mentality can be a bit of a pain, but she earned her place as the number 5 pro hero. I honestly believe she can handle herself all right. Eraserhead assured him. At least she won't have to put up with Endeavor when we arrive. The JSDF has him on standby until further notice. It might make our job easier enough. Hawks nodded. However, he was secretly more concerned about Maruko reverting to her violent tendencies. But there was one other problem that had him on edge. Do we even have any kind of strategy for that walking tank? I know we have numbers on our side, but that guy smacked us around like we were toddlers the first time we fought him. Midnight, and I have been talking it over. We've come up with a plan to dash. Eraserhead started off, but then stopped when he noticed several bright lights rising in the sky from I-Island. Look, he pointed towards the island, garnering everyone's attention. Those are flares. Cementos identified. Do you guys think it's Maruko? It has to be. That's our signal to retake the island. Hawk said to the heroes. Lock and load, ladies and gentlemen. Snipe crooned as he twirled his 6 shooters. Time to rock and roll. All at once, the pro heroes piled into the Pussycats' rescue boats as Mandalay and Tiger revved up the engines. The vessels shot out towards the open sea like a jet straight to their destination, I-Island. Their mission? Rescue the hostages and All Might as well as apprehend the vigilante. But what none of them knew was they were not prepared for the horrors that awaited them. I-Island Airport. Maruko fired one more flare into the air before examining the launcher. It was a pretty sweet piece of ordnance, and one that she wished she could keep. It wasn't her first time holding a weapon. Maruko's hands began to shake as she clutched the weapon. Her eyes dilated as a chill went up her spine. The scenery within her vision seemed to warp and distort until she found herself several years in the past, clutching a 10-gauge shotgun in her hands with a convicted murderer at her feet, screaming in pain as he clutched his blown-off kneecap. She could see her reflection in the puddle of blood, though it did not show her current visage as a hero, but rather a disturbed teen wearing a tiger-themed luchador mask who was smiling insidiously. Maruko shook her head and was brought back to the present. It was all a hallucination, a memory of dark times. Her lips curled up into a grimace, and she smacked the side of her head repeatedly. Come on, damn it. Get your head in the game. Exhaling, Maruko slung the flare launcher around her back with the weapon's leather sling and turned around to see the island's central tower. She broke into a running start and focused all of the power in her legs to launch herself off the roof when she neared the edge and soared through the sky in an arc. As she neared a building, she made another powerful jump just as she landed on the roof while keeping her focus on the tower. As she sailed through the air in another arc, a repulsive scent suddenly assaulted her nostrils, causing her to lose her concentration. The whole island reeked of death, almost enough to overpower her. She took a brief glance down at the city and immediately regretted it. Maruko was so transfixed at what she was witnessing that she lost her balance and began to spiral out of control through the air. She tried to pivot herself around so she could land, but the ground was rapidly approaching. Maruko was able to turn herself around quick enough to land on one foot, but the speed and momentum of her fall caused her to trip over and tumbled across the ground. Once she had stopped, Maruko lifted her head and recoiled in horror at the sight of a dead saber with his head split open wide enough to reveal his pulped brain matter. She shot up and scrambled away from the body, only to trip over another corpse and fall on top of something soft. She glanced behind her to see that she had fallen on top of a small mound of dead bodies, staining the back of her costume and hair with blood. Maruko screamed as she jumped up and stumbled backward into the street. Instead of her feet touching asphalt, however, she felt herself stepping into something warm and sticky. She looked down at her feet and realized she had stepped into a lake of blood that went up to her ankles. Maruko could only stare in horror at the sea of crimson. There was so much that she could see her reflection in it. Her whole body trembling, Maruko turned to her right, and terror consumed her very being. The horrible sight she previously witnessed during her leap was a million times worse up close. Stretching on for what seemed to feel like miles was a literal sea of death and destruction. Thousands of dead steel sabers, either dismembered or disemboweled, stretched on for as long as the eye could see. Dozens of APCs burned like metal tinderboxes. Cracks and craters scarred the buildings around the area as the mercenaries' weapons lay scattered and broken. Internal organs and limbs were splayed everywhere, some even bobbing along in the blood water. Fires littered the gore-soaked landscape, while a larger pillar of flame rose from the destroyed industrial district. Maruko felt like she was in a nightmare. She shakingly walked backward and back onto solid ground, leaving behind bloody footprints. The rabbit heroine continued to stare slack-jawed in horror at the hellish scene before her. It slowly began to dawn upon Maruko that the vigilante was responsible for this slaughter. The gunshots and explosions she and her friends heard, as well as the tank that almost crushed them, were the result of a one-sided massacre of grisly proportions. One man did all of this. Still breathing heavily, Maruko looked behind her to see that she had landed in front of the steps that led up to the main entrance of Island's tower. She took a deep breath and hurried up the stairs where she ran through the blown-open doors. The main lobby looked just the same as the outside. The floor and columns were ripped or blown apart, while a large statue lay toppled over with the globe on the other side of the room. And of course, there were the bodies. Maruko was just about to inspect them when she noticed something on the far wall. She walked over to it and stopped a few feet away from it. The fear came racing back to her, but it was intermingled with confusion. Scrawled upon the wall in blood was what she could only describe as an occultic symbol, a distorted cross with a V shape at the bottom and 4 bizarre symbols located on each corner. Her eyes drifted downward at the message written in blood at the bottom. Rip and tear. What the hell? She whispered to herself. Maruko rubbed her eyes to make sure she wasn't seeing things. It was official. This man was a psycho. The other heroes, and even the HPSC, had to be warned of how dangerous and unhinged this guy was. But then again, why save those people at the airport? Nothing was adding up. Stepping away from the scrawling like it was a bad omen, Maruko went back over to the bodies to identify them. 4 of the bodies were too heavily butchered to tell who it was, but she did recognize one of them. 9. The dreaded leader of the Steel Sabers laid in a pool of his blood, his body mangled and broken with a large portion of the back of his head missing. The other bodies had to have been his lieutenants. If the massacre outside was of any indication, Nine and his goons had met the same fate as their soldiers. But that's when Maruko started to feel a different set of emotions other than the terrifying confusion she felt earlier: relief and contempt. Relief that at long last the Steel Sabers would no longer threaten the world or hunt down any more heroes. No more heroes would be hunted down and killed for sport. No more ruined families. Everyone could rest easy knowing that they were gone. And contempt towards the Steel Sabers in general. Glancing back towards the entrance where the mass slaughter was still visible, she didn't feel any pity for them at all. After everything these hero-murdering bastards did, why would she? They deserved to suffer more. Staring down at Nine's corpse, Maruko spat a wad of saliva upon his body. Good fucking riddance. Maruko suddenly heard a light rumbling from above. She looked up and focused her ears to find the source, managing to pinpoint it coming from the very top of the tower. She ran back outside and looked up towards the tower while her ears rotated themselves to pinpoint the exact location of the disturbance. She noticed an orange glow coming from atop the tower and the faint scent of sulfur in the air mixed with the carrion and offal from the bodies. Her hearing picked up the sound of a gunshot, and she instantly sprang into action. She jumped towards the tower and began bouncing off the outcroppings of the building, rapidly gaining speed and height as her jumps carried her farther and farther up the tower. Maruko neared the top of the tower and smashed her feet against the side of the building before launching herself upwards. The force of her jump sent her shooting into the sky, where she saw a standoff occurring below her, recognizing some of them as the volcano thieves who mysteriously disappeared years ago. The assailants below her whipped their heads up towards her, and Maruko witnessed a young boy with green hair launch himself towards the villain, holding a woman hostage, and slug him across his ugly mug. As soon as the boy got the hostage away from him, Maruko aimed her foot at the villain, pointing a gun at him. Descending from the air, Maruko did a flying kick straight into the gunman's back and slammed him to the ground with enough force to crack the helipad. The kicked-up dust created a smoke screen, and she took this opportunity to pick up the downed villain by the scruff of his coat and knock him senseless with her gloved fist. The punch sent the dumbass crashing into one of his partners. I heard a lot of commotion going on up here, and I just had to hop in on the action. Maruko boasted proudly as the smoke cloud dissipated. You villains who are up to no good, prepare to be sent flying by me. Izuku and Ochako were completely ecstatic while Shoto and Melissa exhaled in relief. Finally, heroes had come to the rescue. But Izuku's look of joy faltered when he noticed the weapon slung across her back, and some parts of her costume and feet were covered in blood. The villains glared at Maruko with annoyance. They weren't expecting heroes to arrive so soon, and certainly not the number 5 pro hero herself. The best thing to do would be to leave immediately and let the VX gas kill them. They have a WMD. Izuku shouted to Maruko. They're going to kill everyone on Island. Led Zeppelin communication breakdown. What? Maruko gaped in shock before she turned to the villains. Her expression switched to furious anger as she cracked her knuckles. Oh, you assholes are in for it now. Volcano responded by blasting a stream of lava from his hands at her, but the hero dodged to the left and threw herself at the villain just as Izuku ran towards Curator. Uraraka, Melissa, and Shoto took this chance to make a break for the rocket to disarm it. Curator saw them heading towards the WMD and turned to Gust Boy and Dusty Ash. Stop them, he ordered as he engaged Izuku. Maruko swung a kick at Volcano's face, but the villain blocked with his armored gauntlet. To his surprise, the force of the kick was strong enough to shatter it apart, and she took advantage of his moment of surprise to spin into another kick that struck his side. Maguma could feel one of his ribs crack, but threw an overhead fist upon Maruko, who dodged it and did a sweeping kick that knocked him off of his feet. The villain recovered fast enough to lob a lava ball at the heroine. Curator easily parried Izuku's flurry of blows and barely had enough time to avoid an errant globe of magma that the hero dodged. Izuku was on the offense, making excellent use of the full gauntlet to keep his power up above 50%. However, he could only use maximum power in the hand that full gauntlet was wrapped around, so he had to keep his one for all at 25% for his other limbs. He was rapidly throwing punches and kicks at Curator, but he was easily sidestepping or blocking his attacks with ease. Truly, If you were indeed worthy of All Might's tutelage, wouldn't this fight be over already? He taunted as he swiftly flipped Izuku over his shoulder before hitting him in the chest with an open palm strike. Izuku rolled across the helipad, but managed to straighten himself up before he could fall over the edge. Izuku scowled as Curator calmly strode over towards him with his hands clasped behind his back. Izuku had to try and think of a different strategy, and by the others' time, so they could deactivate that bomb. Speaking of which, on the other half of the roof, Uraraka and Shoto were engaged in a protracted brawl with Dusty Ash and Gust Boy, while Melissa tried her hardest to disarm the rocket. Shoto sent waves of fire at Gust, while the villain countered the attacks by unleashing gusts of wind to blow away the flames, forcing Shoto to use his ice powers. The switch to the other half of his powers was already providing Shoto an advantage since Gust's wind blasts weren't strong enough to break the ice, and were successful in freezing the villain's hands and feet to the ground. Uraraka was having a little more trouble with her opponent, Dusty Ash. The villainess had switched from blasting Uraraka with ash to closing the distance and attacking with her ninjato-shaped club. Despite taking martial arts lessons from Gunhead, Uraraka couldn't keep up with her much faster enemy. Ash repeatedly battered her all over with her club, taking great sadistic pleasure in each cry of pain from the younger girl. She pelted Uraraka in the face with her ash, blinding her and striking the club across her face. Uraraka tumbled across the ground as Dusty Ash moved in while spinning her club with the intent of breaking her skull, only for Shoto to blindside her with a fiery fist to her back. As dust reeled from the burning sensation on her back, Uraraka touched her by the foot and sent her flying into the air, with Shoto following up by sending a pillar of ice smashing into her midsection. Uraraka pressed her fingers together and Dusty throttled downwards towards Gust. Their faces crashed together and she landed on top of him. Shoto helped Uraraka up, momentarily wincing at her bruised face and bloodied nose. The two of them quickly headed over to Melissa, who had managed to unscrew the main cover for the small rocket with her fingers and found the main wires. "Did you find a way to shut it off?" Uraraka asked hopefully as she and Shoto crowded around her. "I am not sure which wires to remove," Melissa stammered, sweating out of stress. She was very hesitant to yank them out. "I could end up setting it off for all we know /blue and yellow /" The trio jumped at the voice and Uraraka dug out her cell phone to see the symbol on her phone's screen. It was the mysterious contact again. "Remove the blue wire first, then the yellow wire. That will disable the device /" Melissa wasn't sure why Ochako's phone spontaneously started speaking, but there was no time to waste. She grabbed the blue wire and tore it out after a few tugs, then the same with the yellow wire. The clockwork mechanisms slowly grounded to a halt until it stopped completely, heralding its deactivation. "It worked," Melissa exclaimed in surprise as Uraraka shared her expression of joy. "It's disarmed." Her revelry was short-lived when Dusty freed Gust from his entrapment, forcing Uraraka and Shoto to engage them once again. Izuku and Maruko heard Melissa, and the two were relieved, but unfortunately, Volcano and Curator were within earshot as well. Curator hissed to himself in frustration as Izuku took advantage of his distraction. Izuku charged the power of OFA into his legs and zipped behind Curator in midair as arcs of red and green energy danced around him. But Curator spun around and unleashed a loud, ear-piercing sonar wave from his mouthpiece. The reverberating blast sent Izuku tumbling upwards into the air while shouting in pain, covering his ears as the high-pitching clicking noise almost ruptured his eardrums. Curator then extended his left hand, and it enlarged to thrice his size while taking on a whale-like skin texture. He grabbed Izuku out of the air, his fingers wrapped tightly around Izuku, and slowly crushing him. All of that power wasted on a petulant little child. Curator sighed in disappointment. "What did All Might see in you?" He then flung Izuku to the right, and the boy smashed into the wall near the exit, hard enough to almost destroy it completely. Izuku coughed up blood as the rubble collapsed on top of him. "Kid," Maruko called out as she saw the youth getting buried underneath the concrete. Gritting her teeth in rage, she dodged another lava glob from Volcano before jumping onto his face and using it like a springboard, knocking Maguma face first to the ground. Maruko charged towards Curator with murderous intent, her crimson eyes locking onto his visible bored eye. Her ears heard the sound of Curator sucking in the air, and she darted to the left just in time to avoid the sonar wave he sent her way. Volcano got up and was just about to fire a stream of magma at Maruko when Izuku exploded out of the rubble. Manchester smash. Izuku's axe kicked Volcano to the back of his skull, inflicting heavy damage upon the villain who stumbled from the impact. Volcano saw stars in his vision as the back of his head blistered in pain. As Izuku began assailing the disoriented villain, Maruko slammed her feet against Curator's oversized whale arm. You know, they say that you should always save the whales, but for you, I'm willing to make an exception. She ribbed as she backflipped off of his arm and dashed towards the right, just as he swung his fist down upon her. Maruko sidestepped the blow, but that's when Wolfram recovered from his earlier trouncing and charged at Maruko from behind, his muscles expanding and glowing bright orange. Because of her rabbit hearing, Maruko heard it coming a mile away and somersaulted backward to dodge the blow, and then wrapped both of her legs around his neck. Luna catapult. Maruko spun herself around and flung Wolfram towards Curator with her legs. Wolfram yelled in panic as he flew towards his superior, but was instantly swatted aside by Curator's massive fist. However, this was only a distraction as Maruko had already closed the distance. Curator tried to use his sonar wave, but Maruko elbowed him in the throat before he could breathe in, and then jumped up with her foot raised high while he was gagging for air. Luna fall. Maruko swung her foot down upon Curator's collarbone, and as soon as she landed, Spin kicked him in the side of his helmet with enough force to leave a massive indentation. Meanwhile, Izuku continued to fight Volcano, using his speed and small frame to his advantage as he dodged the villain's magma balls. But Volcano managed to get a lucky hit in and uppercut Izuku right in the chest, his superheated knuckles burning through the boy's shirt. Izuku hacked up a wad of blood before being sent failing across the ground, the hard concrete scraping his skin as his chest burned. Izuku struggled to get up as Volcano popped his knuckles threateningly. You're doing this for nothing, brat. Just give up, let us turn the rocket back on, and you have my word. Your deaths will be quick. Volcano reasoned with callous impunity. Gnashing his teeth together, Izuku stood back up as blood dribbled from the corners of his mouth. If I gave up here and let you walk away with killing everyone here, I could never call myself a hero. Izuku balled his fist as energy surged around him, his determination driving him to keep fighting. Maguma smiled behind his face mask as he held up his hands, two large globes of magma forming until they were the size of watermelons. Heh, it's always funny listening to you moral crusaders spout your bullshit. Makes killing you all the sweeter. Krakatoa rail. Volcano thrust his hands out, and a column of magma erupted forth in a spiral motion right towards Izuku. Channeling the full 100% might of OFA into his full gauntlet, Izuku reared his fist back as the energy crackling around him reached an apex. Texas Smaowa Wasiash. Izuku threw a right punch so hard that it created a massive burst of wind that drilled straight through Volcano's attack, displacing the magma and cooling it into igneous rock. Wadash. Volcano never got the chance to finish as the gale force punch slammed into his midsection, the force of impact breaking several ribs and nearly collapsing both of his lungs. He was sent flying right into Curator, and the two tumbled across the helipad right next to a beaten-up Wolfram. Maruko was awestruck at Izuku's power and could only whistle in response. Hot damn, kid. What kind of quirk is that? Izuku blushed from being complimented by an attractive woman, but snapped himself out of it when Uraraka, Shoto, and Melissa came running over. Melissa was carrying the compact WMD in her hands while the two students were covered in ash, bruises, and scrapes. The bomb's disabled, but we need to get it as far away from them as possible. Shoto said urgently. You guys get downstairs and head to the airport. The heroes will be on their way soon. Just try not to look at the blood and carnage along the way. Maruko instructed, sounding hesitant at the last part. Everyone gulped and glanced at each other worriedly. Curator and Volcano, despite the significant damage wrought upon them, slowly staggered to their feet. What the hell did they do to you two? Wolfram demanded, soon regretting his poor choice of words. Volcano suddenly fisted Wolfram away from him, breaking his teeth and sending him smacking into the ground. Useless little shit. Volcano angrily grumbled under his breath as Wolfram coughed up his molars. His chest and lungs burned, but was still able to stand on his own 2 feet. How the fuck is that kid so strong? He's the next inheritor of One for All, Curator quietly revealed to him. Volcano looked at Curator in surprise. That explained a lot. As Izuku and the others stared down the recovering villains, Maruko cracked her neck as she stepped forward. She then grinned with anticipation. You all get out of here. I can handle Beavis and Butthead. I'll go remove the rubble. Ochako volunteered as she went over to the blocked exit with Melissa following behind. Izuku and Shoto were about to assist her, but turned behind them to see Maruko about to tussle with the villains. Looking at each other, Shoto silently nodded to his friend who returned the gesture. The pair walked up towards the rabbit heroine and stood by her side while taking their respective fighting stances. Huh. A puzzled Maruko looked to the boys standing by her. I thought I told you kids to dash. We know. Shoto cut her off. But it's our fight too, and we thought we could even the odds a little. Look, I'm one of those loner-type heroes, so I don't exactly do team-ups. Maruko huffed in annoyance. We know. You're famous for your aversion to teams, but we're not backing down or walking away. Izuku replied in a serious tone. You can either kick us away or let us help you. Your choice. Maruko blinked at them, wide-eyed before breaking into a huge smile that brimmed with gusto. You two got moxie. I like it. Let's just see if you can keep up with me. She instantly sprinted towards the villains with Shoto and Izuku easily matching her speed. Izuku channeled OFA, Shoto formed fire and ice in his hands while Maruko balled up her fists. Hit them as hard you can. Knock him senseless in one blow. Right. Nearing the 2 oddly unmoving villains, the trio jumped into the air with their signature moves at the ready. They let out their battle cries as they throttled towards the villains with the intent to render them. Shardstorm. Nanowall. Curator's left hand started to shift and crack until it resembled a mass of broken glass running up the length of his arm. It then exploded outwards, sending shards of razor-sharp glass at Maruko. The shards tore across her right leg and arm, slicing up her skin while one errant shard embedded itself on her side. The heroine screamed in horrible pain as she fell to the ground on top of the scattered glass laying about, adding more to her suffering. Around the same time, a wall of black and purple material shot up in front of Volcano, blocking Izuku and Shoto's attacks. They tried as hard as they could to free themselves, but they found themselves sinking into the wall and restricting their movements. A tendril emerged from the wall and tightly coiled around his throat, throwing him into the air before lashing him down to the ground near Uraraka and Melissa. Izuku tried to wrench his hands out until the murky substance started engulfing his hands, lifting it so that Izuku could see his full gauntlet being slowly disassembled bit by bit right before his very eyes. Volcano's hand shot out of the wall and gripped Izuku by the neck and tightly squeezed. The wall deconstructed itself in a cubical pattern to reveal Volcano, his forehead and hands covered with the same material as the blockade. Nanomachines, son. They only activate in response to extreme physical trauma, and I'm going to pay you back in full. Volcano yelled as he headbutted Midoriya with his nanite-infused head before unleashing a devastating nano haymaker that hurled him across the helipad where the boy bounced along the ground. Curator blasted Maruko with another sonar wave at her, the force throwing her back towards the others. His body racked with searing pain. Izuku willed himself to stand up, but nearly all of his strength had left him. His bones had sustained fractures. His nose was broken, and he could taste blood in his mouth. Shoto wasn't faring any better. He could barely pick himself up while clutching his bleeding chest. Maruko was able to stand, but the broken glass sticking out of her arm, leg, and one sizable piece sticking out of her side caused her no end of suffering. Motherfuck! Maruko grunted in pain as she yanked out each shard out of her arms and legs, spilling blood onto the ground. How did they have different quirks? Izuku knew the answer all too well, All for One. One time during his private conversations with All Might, the hero had relayed to Izuku that one of the villains present during the USJ villain invasion, known as Nomu, apparently had multiple quirks. This led to the possibility that All for One had the ability to steal quirks and transfer them into other people, or rather those he deemed worthy, if those 2 villains were of any indication. Uraraka stopped moving the rubble blocking the exit with her quirk and ran over to help Shoto, but that's when a gust of ash swept in from the left and knocked her to the ground. End of the line, fuckers. Dusty Ash snarled as she and Gust Boy stomped towards the helpless teens and Melissa. They had been beaten and frozen to the ground again earlier. To say that they were pissed would be an understatement. Melissa stepped away in fear while still holding the WMD. Izuku looked back and forth between his friends and the villains. They were all in a very bad situation. Neither of them was in any position to fight. The exit was still blocked. The villains were closing in and two of them had multiple quirks. The odds were stacked against them. At this point, there was nothing to stop the villains from reactivating the WMD. Izuku didn't know what to do. This was beginning to look like the end of his dreams. Maruko fought through the horrific pain she was in as she stared down the approaching villains in defiance. Blood continued to flow from her wounds and pooled at her feet, giving her a rather disturbing appearance unbefitting for a hero. Maruko glanced behind her shoulder at the others and noticed how scared and badly wounded they were. Maruko mapped out a plan in her head. Clear the exit and get them out of harm's way while she held off the villains. Chances are she would most likely going to die, but she couldn't think of the worst way to go out. Grinning in an almost evil-looking manner, Maruko prepared herself for what would be her last stand and die with flying colors. Only for the roof exit to suddenly explode outward, scattering rubble and startling everyone present. Maruko, Izuku, and the others looked behind them at the now uncovered exit and heard footsteps. Loud, heavy, plodding footsteps. At first, they couldn't see who it was due to the darkened rooftop, but as soon as the figure stepped into view, they all reacted with terror. Melissa backed away in fright. Shoto and Uraraka gasped. Izuku broke out into a cold sweat as his eyes widened in fear. "Oh shit," Maruko muttered as her veins turned icy cold. "It's him." To be continued. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed Support the Writer. Don't forget to like, sub, and share.